grand halls of Belgrave House, a cursed portrait hides a deadly secret, a fortune in jewels that sparks greed and murder. When artist Victor Moreau is poisoned and Dr. Malcolm Trent is stabbed, only Hercule Poirot's brilliant mind can unravel the web of lies. As the slashed canvas reveals a hidden key, suspicions fall on the glamorous actress Clara, the debt-ridden Julian, and the enigmatic Lady Eleanor. In a race against time, Poirot uncovers a chilling truth. One among them will kill to protect the treasure. Will he stop the shadow of the fatal portrait before it claims another life? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Belgrave House. The late autumn sun cast a golden haze over the Kent countryside as the taxi wound its way through lanes hedged with hawthorn and bramble. Hercule Poirot sat upright in the back seat, his gloved hands resting on the silver handle of his cane, his mustache a perfect study in symmetry. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fidgeted, adjusting his scarf against the October chill. The invitation to Belgrave House had arrived at Poirot's London flat a week prior, penned on cream vellum in the elegant looping hand of Lady Eleanor Ashby. It requested his presence for a weekend gathering to unveil a portrait of her late husband, Sir Reginald Ashby, a man whose fortune in steel had made him a titan of industry and a collector of fine art. The letter hinted at a matter requiring discretion, though it offered no further clue. "Odd, don't you think, Poirot?" Hastings remarked, peering out at the rolling hills. "A portrait unveiling hardly seems your sort of thing. Why drag us out to this pile in the middle of nowhere?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of curiosity. "Mon ami, you see a mere painting. I see a puzzle. Where there is wealth, there is envy. Where there is art, there is passion. And where there is secrecy, there is always a role for Hercule Poirot." The taxi crunched to a halt before Belgrave House, a Georgian masterpiece of pale stone, its tall windows reflecting the fading light. Ivy clung to the facade, softening the severe lines of its Palladian columns. Two footmen in livery stood at the entrance, their faces impassive as they ushered the guests inside. The hall was a vision of understated opulence. A marble floor gleamed under a chandelier, and a sweeping staircase led to shadowed upper floors. A faint scent of beeswax and roses hung in the air. Lady Eleanor Ashby greeted them in the drawing room, a spacious chamber adorned with gilt-framed landscapes and a roaring fire. She was a woman of 50, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her blue eyes sharp and assessing beneath a composed smile. Her black silk dress, though mourning appropriate, was cut with a modern elegance that spoke of wealth and taste. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a hand, "your presence honors us, and Captain Hastings, a pleasure." "The honor is mine, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "Your invitation was most intriguing." Hastings, ever the gallant, added, "Splendid house, Lady Eleanor, quite a setting for a portrait unveiling." Her smile tightened. "Yes, a tribute to my late husband, but there are complications. We shall discuss them tomorrow." The other guests were already assembled, and Poirot's keen gaze took their measure. Julian Ashby, Sir Reginald's stepson, lounged by a fireplace, a glass of brandy in hand. At 30, he had the dark, good looks of a romantic poet, but his sullen expression and the faint tremor in his fingers suggested a man burdened by debts or demons. Clara Beaumont, a celebrated actress and Sir Reginald's former mistress, drew every eye with her golden hair and velvet gown, though her laughter seemed forced. Dr. Malcolm Trent, the family physician, was a wiry man with thinning hair and a habit of adjusting his spectacles, his nervous energy at odds with his profession. Miss Beatrice Lyle, Lady Eleanor's companion, was a mousy woman in her late 20s, her plain gray dress and downcast eyes belying a watchful intelligence. Finally, there was Victor Moreau, the French artist who had painted the portrait, his crimson scarf and theatrical gestures making him a vivid contrast to the somber company. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a table gleamed with silver and crystal. Over consommé and roasted pheasant, conversation turned to the portrait. Moreau, his voice rich with a Parisian accent, described his work with fervor. "Sir Reginald, he was a man of strength, of vision. I have captured him thus. His eyes, they pierce the heart, non?" Julian snorted, swirling his wine. "A waste of paint, if you ask me. Father's legacy doesn't need a canvas to endure." Clara's fork paused, her lips trembling. "It's a fitting tribute, Julian. You might show some respect." Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. "Enough! The portrait will be unveiled tomorrow at noon. I trust you'll all attend." Her tone brooked no argument, but Poirot noted the faint quiver in her hand as she reached for her glass. Dr. Trent cleared his throat. "There's talk in the village, you know, about the portrait. They say it's unlucky. Moreau's studio had a fire last month, didn't it? And a theft before that." Moreau waved a dismissive hand. "Peasant nonsense. Art provokes superstition in small minds." Poirot sipped his wine, his mind cataloguing every glance, every word. The mention of a curse was intriguing, but he suspected it masked a more tangible motive. After dinner, he excused himself to stroll the long gallery where the portrait hung, still concealed beneath a velvet drape. The air was cool, the silence broken only by the creak of polished floorboards. Hastings, trailing behind, chuckled. "All this talk of curses, Poirot. Surely you don't believe it." "Belief, Hastings, is irrelevant. What matters is why such a story exists. A curse is a convenient veil for human misdeeds." Poirot paused before the draped portrait, his fingers brushing the velvet. "This painting, it holds a secret, and secrets, mon ami, are dangerous." As they returned to their rooms, the great house seemed to settle around them, its shadows deepening. Poirot's little gray cells were already at work, sensing that Belgrave House was a stage, and the drama was only beginning. Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Portrait. The dining room of Belgrave House glowed with the soft light of candelabras, casting flickering shadows on the damask wallpaper. The guests, sated with pheasant and claret, lingered over dessert, a delicate lemon soufflé that seemed at odds with the undercurrent of unease rippling through the room. Hercule Poirot, seated between Miss Beatrice Lyle and Captain Hastings, observed the company with the precision of a watchmaker. His small, neat hands folded a napkin with meticulous care, but his green eyes missed nothing. The way Julian Ashby's fingers tightened around his glass, the fleeting glance Clara Beaumont cast toward Lady Eleanor, the nervous tick in Dr. Malcolm Trent's cheek as he spoke of village gossip. The conversation, steered by Victor Moreau's theatrical enthusiasm, returned to the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashby, still hidden beneath its velvet drape in the long gallery. "It is a masterpiece, mes amis," Moreau declared, his crimson scarf fluttering as he gestured. The canvas holds not just a face, but a soul, Sir Reginald's strength, his ambition, his secrets. His dark eyes gleamed, as if he knew more than he revealed. Julian Ashby leaned back, his lips curling in a sneer. Secrets? The only secret is how much you charged for it, Moreau. A pretty penny for a bit of paint, I'd wager. Lady Eleanor's voice was sharp, like the crack of a whip. Julian, that's enough. The portrait honors your stepfather's memory. You might at least pretend to care. Clara Beaumont, her golden hair catching the candlelight, set down her spoon with a clink. It's beautiful, Victor. Sir Reginald would have been proud. Her voice trembled, and Poirot noted the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. Was it grief for a lost love, or something else? Dr. Trent, pushing his spectacles up his nose, interjected hesitantly. There's been talk, you know, in the village. They say the portraits brought nothing but trouble. A fire in your studio, Monsieur Moreau, and before that, a theft of some sketches, and wasn't there an illness too? The locals call it cursed. Moreau laughed, a rich, dismissive sound. Superstition. The English countryside thrives on such tales. My studio fire was a careless assistant's fault, nothing more. As for the theft, bah, jealous rivals, no doubt. Poirot sipped his coffee, his mind cataloguing the exchange. A curse was a convenient fiction, often used to obscure a more prosaic truth. He glanced at Beatrice Lyle, who had remained silent, her plain face composed, but her eyes darting between the speakers. She was, Poirot thought, a woman who saw more than she said. As the party dispersed, Lady Eleanor invited the men for cigars in the library, while the women retired to the drawing-room. Poirot, however, excused himself, murmuring about the need for a constitutional. "Hastings, mon ami, will you join me?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes insistent. "Bit late for a stroll, isn't it?" Hastings replied, stifling a yawn. But he followed, accustomed to Poirot's whims. They made their way to the long gallery, a cavernous room lined with portraits of Ashby ancestors, their painted eyes staring into the gloom. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of old wood and wax. At the far end, the portrait of Sir Reginald stood draped in deep blue velvet, its presence almost palpable. Poirot approached, his cane tapping softly on the polished floor. "This painting," he said, almost to himself, "it is the heart of this mystery. Why such fuss over a mere canvas?" Hastings chuckled, his breath visible in the chill air. "You're reading too much into it, Poirot. It's just a picture. The curse talk is nonsense, village tittle-tattle." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the velvet drape. "But nonsense often cloaks intention. Why speak of a curse unless to distract from something else? The little gray cells, they are curious." He lifted a corner of the drape, revealing a glimpse of gilt frame, but did not pull it back entirely. "Tomorrow, at the unveiling, we shall see what secrets this portrait holds. For now, let us observe the living, not the painted." They returned to the drawing-room, where Clara Beaumont was playing a melancholy tune on the pianoforte, her fingers hesitant on the keys. Lady Eleanor sat by the fire, her embroidery untouched, her gaze distant. Beatrice Lyle, perched on a settee, was reading a novel, though Poirot noted her eyes flicked upward whenever someone spoke. Julian and Dr. Trent had joined the women, the former pacing restlessly, the latter sipping brandy with a trembling hand. "Everything all right, Monsieur Poirot?" Lady Eleanor asked, her voice polite but strained. "Tout à fait, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "I merely wish to admire your fine gallery, a most impressive collection." Julian snorted. Father's obsession, paintings, sculptures, dusty old relics, wasted money if you ask me. Clara's playing faltered, and she turned sharply. "They were his passion, Julian. You might respect that." "Respect?" Julian's voice rose, bitter. "He left me nothing but debts and a crumbling estate. Respect doesn't pay the bills." Lady Eleanor's needle stabbed into the fabric. "Julian, control yourself. We have guests." Poirot watched the exchange, noting the flush on Julian's cheeks, the way Clara's hands clenched, the nervous glance Dr. Trent cast toward the door. Beatrice Lyle, he observed, had lowered her book, her eyes fixed on Julian with an intensity that belied her meek demeanor. As the evening drew to a close, the guests retired to their rooms. Poirot and Hastings ascended the grand staircase, the house creaking around them like a living thing. In their shared sitting room, Hastings sank into an armchair. "Odd bunch, aren't they? Julian's got a chip on his shoulder, Clara's all tears and drama, and that doctor, nervous as a cat. What do you make of it, Poirot?" Poirot adjusted a candlestick on the mantel, ensuring its symmetry. "I make nothing yet, mon ami, but I observe. The portrait is the key, I think, not for its art, but for what it represents, or conceals. Tomorrow we shall see." Sleep, however, was not to be. At 1:30, a piercing scream shattered the silence of Belgrave House. Poirot, already awake and dressed in a silk dressing gown, was at the door in an instant, Hastings stumbling behind him. They followed the sound to the gallery, where the other guests were gathering, their faces pale in the flickering light of hastily lit candles. Beatrice Lyle stood trembling before the portrait, her hands pressed to her mouth. The velvet drape lay crumpled on the floor, and the canvas was exposed. A striking likeness of Sir Reginald, his stern face rendered with uncanny realism. But across his painted features ran a jagged slash, as if struck by a blade. The canvas hung in tatters, the eyes of the portrait seeming to accuse. Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand clutching her throat. "Who did this?" she whispered. Julian swore under his breath, his eyes darting to Clara, who stood frozen, her face ashen. Dr. Trent muttered something about vandalism, while Moreau, his flamboyance gone, stared at the ruined painting with a look of horror. Poirot stepped forward, his calm unshaken. He examined the slash, noting the precision of the cut, the absence of paint flakes on the floor. "This was no act of impulse," he said softly. "It was deliberate, and deliberate acts, mes amis, have purpose." Hastings, peering over his shoulder, frowned. "But why destroy a painting? It's just a picture." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Non, Hastings, it is never just anything. This portrait holds a secret, and someone wishes it to remain hidden." As the guests dispersed, whispering and uneasy, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the ruined canvas. The shadow of the portrait had fallen over Belgrave House, and the little gray cells were already at work, unraveling the threads of motive and deceit. Chapter 3. The First Death. The dawn broke over Belgrave House with a pallor that matched the mood within its walls. The slashed portrait of Sir Reginald Ashby, discovered in the small hours, had cast a shadow over the household, and the guests awoke to a morning heavy with suspicion. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood in the morning room, sipping a tisane and gazing out at the mist-shrouded gardens. His mind, ever active, turned over the events of the night, the scream, the ruined canvas, the fleeting expressions of fear and guilt on the faces of those gathered. Captain Hastings joined him, his face drawn from a restless night. "Ghastly business, that painting," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from a silent footman. "But who'd do such a thing, Poirot? And why?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Why, indeed, mon ami. The act was not vandalism for its own sake. It was a message or a warning. But to whom and about what?" Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the upper floors. A maid's cry echoed through the house, followed by the heavy tread of footsteps. Lady Eleanor appeared at the door, her face ashen, her usual composure frayed. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, come quickly. It's Monsieur Moreau." Poirot set down his cup with deliberate calm and followed her, Hastings at his heels. They ascended the staircase to the guest wing, where a small crowd had gathered outside Victor Moreau's room. The butler, a dour man named Perkins, stood guard, his hands clasped tightly. Inside, the scene was grim. Victor Moreau lay sprawled across the bed, his face contorted in a rictus of pain, his crimson scarf tangled around his neck. In his stiffened hand was a small glass vial, empty save for a faint residue of liquid. Dr. Malcolm Trent, kneeling beside the body, looked up as Poirot entered. "He's dead," he said, his voice unsteady. "Poison, I'd wager. Prussic acid by the smell." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room. The curtains were drawn, the air heavy with the acrid scent of almonds. A half-burned letter lay in the grate, its edges charred but a few words still legible. "You must not." On the windowsill, a smudge of red paint caught his attention, vivid against the white wood. It matched the pigment he had seen on the slashed portrait. "Suicide, perhaps?" Hastings ventured, his tone uncertain. "Non, Hastings," Poirot said firmly. "An artist such as Moreau does not destroy his own work and then himself. This is murder, carefully staged." The local police were summoned, and Inspector Grayson, a heavy-set man with a penchant for simple explanations, arrived within the hour. He examined the vial, the body, and the room with a cursory glance before declaring, "Clear case of suicide. The fellow was distraught over his ruined painting, no doubt." Poirot's lips pursed in disapproval. "Inspector, permit me to suggest otherwise. The letter in the fireplace, the paint on the windowsill, these are not the signs of a man who takes his own life. They are clues to a deeper truth." Grayson shrugged, unmoved. "Clues or not, I've a job to do. We'll need statements from everyone." Over breakfast, served in a strained silence, Poirot began his inquiries. Lady Eleanor, seated at the head of the table, confirmed she had hired Moreau on Clara Beaumont's recommendation, though she admitted to misgivings about his flamboyant nature. He was talented, but indiscreet, she said, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Julian Ashby, his eyes bloodshot, spoke bitterly. "Father's will left me nothing but debts. This portrait nonsense was just another drain on the estate. Maybe Moreau got what he deserved." Clara, her face pale beneath her rouge, gasped, "How dare you, Julian? Victor was devoted to your father's memory." Poirot turned to her, his tone gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, you knew Monsieur Moreau well, yes? Did he ever speak of threats, of enemies?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to Lady Eleanor. "No, Not exactly. He mentioned the troubles at his studio, the fire, the theft, but he laughed them off, said they were accidents. Dr. Trent, pushing a piece of toast around his plate, mumbled, "I warned him to be careful. The village talk about a curse wasn't all nonsense. People resented his presence here." Poirot's gaze lingered on the doctor, noting his pallor, the way his hands trembled. "And you, doctor? Where were you last night, after the portrait was discovered?" Trent flushed. "In my room, of course. I couldn't sleep, but I didn't leave." Beatrice Lyle, who had been silent, spoke softly. "I heard footsteps in the gallery, Monsieur Poirot, before the scream. I couldn't say whose, but they were heavy, deliberate." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. He excused himself to re-examine Moreau's room, accompanied by Hastings. The smudge of red paint on the window-sill intrigued him. "This paint, Hastings, it is the same as the portraits. Someone entered or left this room after the vandalism. But why?" He crouched by the fireplace, retrieving the burned letter with a pair of tweezers. The fragment was tantalizingly incomplete. "You must not reveal the truth about—" The handwriting was elegant, feminine. "Lady Eleanor's or another's?" "Hastings," Poirot said, rising. "We are dealing with a mind that plans carefully. The poison, the slashed canvas, the letter, these are not random. They are pieces of a puzzle, and the portrait is at its center." Back in the drawing room, Poirot questioned Perkins, the butler, who revealed a tidbit of gossip. Sir Reginald had been rumored to possess a hidden fortune, perhaps in rare art or jewels, though no one knew its location. The portrait, Perkins whispered, was said to hold a clue, a notion dismissed by the family but persistent among the staff. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A fortune, you say? Most interesting. And who else knew of this rumor?" "Everyone, sir," Perkins admitted. "It's been whispered about for years." As the morning wore on, the guests grew restless, their glances wary. Clara paced by the window, her hands twisting a silk scarf. Julian retreated to the library, a bottle of brandy in hand. Dr. Trent excused himself to check his medical bag, though Poirot noted his hurried steps. Beatrice Lyle remained in the drawing room, her embroidery a pretense as she watched the others. "Hastings," Poirot said quietly, "we must be vigilant. The portrait was a warning, and Moreau's death is the first act of a darker drama. Someone in this house fears exposure, and they will strike again to protect their secret." Hastings frowned. "But who, Poirot? And what's this secret?" Poirot adjusted his cufflinks, his expression enigmatic. "That, mon ami, is what the little gray cells will uncover. For now, we watch and we listen." The air in Belgrave House seemed to thicken, as if the very walls held their breath. Poirot, undaunted, prepared to unravel the threads of motive and deceit, knowing the truth lay just beyond the shadow of the fatal portrait. Chapter 4. The Hidden Motive. The atmosphere in Belgrave House had grown taut as a violin string, each guest moving with the wariness of those who sense an unseen threat. Hercule Poirot, seated in the morning room with a cup of tisane, observed the household through the lens of his little gray cells. The death of Victor Moreau, so brutally staged as suicide, and the desecration of Sir Reginald Ashby's portrait pointed to a calculated mind at work. Captain Hastings, pacing by the window, broke the silence. "This is a grim business, Poirot. First the painting, now Moreau. What's next?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with purpose. "Next, mon ami, we uncover the motive. Murder is never without reason, and this one is tied to the portrait. But why? That is the question. The morning's inquiries had yielded fragments of truth, like pieces of a shattered mirror. Poirot had requested a private audience with each guest, and now, as the clock struck 11, he began in the library, a room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy with the scent of old paper. Lady Eleanor Ashby sat opposite him, her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady but her eyes guarded, "I hope you can make sense of this tragedy. Victor Moreau was difficult, but he did not deserve such an end." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, you chose Monsieur Moreau for the portrait. Why him, precisely?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her fingers brushing the pearl brooch at her throat. "Clara recommended him. She said he had captured Sir Reginald's likeness in sketches years ago. I trusted her judgment, though I found his manner theatrical." "And these rumors of a curse?" Poirot pressed, his tone mild but insistent. "Did you give them credence?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "Village nonsense. I paid it no mind, though it unsettled the staff." Poirot noted the flicker of unease in her eyes. She was hiding something, he was certain, but he let her withdraw, turning instead to Clara Beaumont. The actress entered with a rustle of silk, her beauty undimmed by the morning's strain. Her eyes, however, were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled as she sat. "Monsieur Poirot, I can't believe Victor is gone. He was so alive, so passionate." "You knew him well, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, watching her closely. "We met in London, years ago," she admitted. "He sketched me for a playbill. When I heard Lady Eleanor wanted a portrait of Sir Reginald, I suggested Victor. He understood Reggie, his strength, his charm." Her voice broke, and she dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Poirot leaned forward. "And did Monsieur Moreau ever speak of the portrait's significance, beyond its artistic value?" Clara's gaze faltered. "He said it was special, that it captured something private about Reggie. I thought he meant sentimentally. Now, I'm not sure." Next came Julian Ashby, slouching into the chair with a scowl. His breath carried the faint tang of whiskey, though it was barely noon. "What do you want, Poirot? I've nothing to hide. Moreau was a charlatan, and his death doesn't surprise me." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Monsieur, your stepfathers will left you little. Yes? Did you hope the portrait might reveal something more tangible?" Julian's eyes narrowed. "If you're suggesting I killed him for some mythical treasure, you're barking up the wrong tree. I didn't like the man, but I didn't poison him." "And last night, after the portrait was slashed?" Poirot asked smoothly. "Where were you?" "In my room, drinking," Julian snapped. "Ask the footman who brought me the bottle." Dr. Malcolm Trent was next, his spectacles glinting nervously as he sat. "I don't know what I can tell you, Monsieur Poirot," he began, his voice high. "I examined Moreau's body. It was poison, as I said. I was in my room all night." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "Yet Mademoiselle Lyle heard footsteps in the gallery. Could they have been yours, doctor?" Trent flushed, his hands twisting. "I couldn't sleep, so I walked the corridors. But I didn't go near the gallery, I swear." Finally, Beatrice Lyle entered, her plain gray dress making her nearly invisible against the room's somber tones. She sat primly, her hands folded, but her eyes met Poirot's with quiet confidence. "Monsieur Poirot, I only wish to help. This house, it's full of shadows." "You are observant, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "You heard footsteps before the scream. Anything else?" She hesitated, then spoke softly. "I saw someone in the gallery earlier that evening, before dinner. It was dark, but I think it was Dr. Trent. He was near the portrait, looking anxious." Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. Alone? Again, he paced the library, his mind assembling the pieces. The portrait was more than art. It was a key, perhaps to the rumored fortune Perkins had mentioned. He resolved to examine it again, and with Hastings in tow, he returned to the gallery. The slashed canvas hung forlornly, Sir Reginald's painted face marred by the jagged cut. Poirot studied it, his fingers tracing the frame's edge. "Hastings, observe. The slash is precise, not wild. It was meant to destroy something specific." He knelt, inspecting the frame's underside, and his fingers found an irregularity, a slight bulge. With care, he pried open a hidden compartment, revealing a small brass key, its surface etched with a tiny crest. "Aha!" he exclaimed, holding it aloft. "The portrait is indeed a map, mon ami." Hastings blinked. "A map to what, Poirot? That fortune everyone whispers about?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, pocketing the key. "But we must tread carefully. This key is a danger to someone." As they left the gallery, Clara Beaumont approached, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I feel watched. Ever since last night, it's as if eyes are following me." Poirot studied her, noting the fear in her eyes. "Mademoiselle, remain vigilant, and tell me, have you seen anyone near your room?" She shook her head, but her glance darted toward the staircase, where Julian's shadow lingered. Poirot filed this away, his suspicions deepening. Later, in the drawing room, Beatrice Lyle confided in Poirot, her voice low. "I didn't want to say before, but I saw Dr. Trent again after the scream. He was coming from the guest wing, not his own room." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Merci, mademoiselle. Your observations are most valuable." As the afternoon waned, the house seemed to close in, its grandeur tainted by fear. Poirot knew the key in his pocket was a clue to more than a fortune. It was a motive for murder. Someone in Belgrave House was desperate to keep the truth buried, and Poirot was determined to unearth it before the shadow of the portrait claimed another victim. Chapter 5. The Second Strike. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Belgrave House, casting long shadows across the parquet floors. The air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and tension, as if the very walls anticipated the next calamity. Hercule Poirot, seated in the library with the small brass key concealed in his waistcoat pocket, pondered its significance. The key, hidden behind the slashed portrait of Sir Reginald Ashby, was a tangible link to the rumored fortune, a fortune that had already cost Victor Moreau his life. Captain Hastings, restless as ever, stood by the fireplace, poking at the embers. "This key, Poirot," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "It's got to unlock something important, hasn't it? Why else would someone kill for it?" Poirot's fingers brushed his mustache, his eyes distant. "Précisément, Hastings. The key is a door to the truth, but also to danger. We must discover what it opens before another pays the price." Their conversation was cut short by a sharp cry from the hall. Poirot rose swiftly, his cane tapping as he followed the sound, Hastings close behind. The guests were gathering in the library's doorway, their faces pale. Clara Beaumont, her hands trembling, pointed toward the far end of the room. There, slumped in a high-backed chair, was Dr. Malcolm Trent, his spectacles askew, a letter opener protruding from his chest. Blood stained his waistcoat, pooling on the Aubusson rug beneath him. Lady Eleanor stifled a gasp, her hand clutching Beatrice Lyle's arm. Julian Ashby swore softly, his eyes darting to the door. Clara turned away, her face buried in her hands, while Beatrice stood frozen, her usual composure shaken. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gaze methodical. The letter opener, silver and ornate, was buried deep, suggesting a forceful blow. Trent's hand clutched a crumpled piece of paper, a prescription, half torn, with the initials C.B. scrawled in the margin. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice low. "Another death, and so soon. This is no coincidence." Inspector Grayson, summoned once more, arrived with a weary sigh. "This is getting out of hand, Monsieur Poirot," he said, scratching his chin. "First the artist, now the doctor. Looks like a madman's work." Poirot's eyes flashed with impatience. "No, Inspector. A madman acts without reason. This killer is precise, purposeful. Observe the letter opener. It is from the desk here, yes? And this paper? Why did Dr. Trent hold it so tightly?" Grayson shrugged, ordering his constable to secure the room. Poirot, undeterred, slipped the prescription into his pocket for later study. He turned to the guests, his voice calm but commanding. "Mes amis, no one leaves this house until we speak. The truth is close, but it is dangerous." In the drawing room, Poirot began his inquiries anew. Clara, her voice trembling, admitted to seeing Dr. Trent earlier that day, pacing near the library. "He seemed agitated," she said, twisting her scarf. "He kept muttering about knowing too much. I thought he meant the curse." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you, mademoiselle, have you received payments from Sir Reginald? The initials C.B. appear in his ledger." Clara flushed, her eyes wide. "Payments? Yes, Reggie supported my theater work, but it was no secret. He believed in me." Her voice broke, and Poirot noted the sincerity in her tears, though he wondered what else she concealed. Julian, questioned next, was belligerent. "Trent was a nervous old fool," he snapped, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Always poking his nose into family business. Maybe he crossed the wrong person." "And you, Monsieur Ashby?" Poirot asked. "Your debts are great. Did Dr. Trent know something that threatened you?" Julian's face darkened, but he said nothing, exhaling a cloud of smoke. Poirot turned to Beatrice Lyle, who sat quietly, her embroidery needle still. "Mademoiselle, you saw Dr. Trent in the guest wing last night. Did you see him today, perhaps near the library?" Beatrice nodded slowly. "This morning, he was coming from Sir Reginald's study. He looked frightened. He carried a book, a ledger, I think." Poirot's mind raced. The study. He excused himself, beckoning Hastings to follow. Sir Reginald's study was a small oak-paneled room, its desk cluttered with papers. Poirot tested the key from the portrait on a locked drawer, and it clicked open with a satisfying turn. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with meticulous entries. The final ones, dated days before Sir Reginald's death, recorded payments to C.B., substantial sums marked as investments. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "This C.B. is the key to the motive, but is it Clara Beaumont or another?" Hastings frowned. "Clara's the obvious choice, but she seems genuinely broken up about Sir Reginald. Could it be someone else?" "Perhaps," Poirot mused, closing the ledger. "We must be cautious. The killer is watching, and this ledger is a threat." As they returned to the drawing room, Clara approached Poirot, her face drawn. "Monsieur Poirot, I must tell you something. Reggie and we were engaged, secretly. He planned to announce it, but then he died. I didn't tell anyone because of Julian's anger." Poirot studied her, noting the tremble in her voice. "And the payments, mademoiselle, were they for you?" She nodded, tears spilling. "For my theater company. He wanted me to succeed, but I swear I know nothing about a fortune." Before Poirot could press further, Julian burst into the room, his face flushed. "You scheming actress," he shouted at Clara. "You bled my father dry, and now you play the innocent." Lady Eleanor intervened, her voice icy. "Julian, stop this. Clara was dear to your father. You will not speak to her this way." Poirot observed the exchange, noting Lady Eleanor's protective tone. Was she shielding Clara, or something else? He addressed the group. "Mes amis, 2 men are dead, and the truth lies in Sir Reginald's secrets. I urge you to be honest. The next strike may come for any of us." As night fell, the house seemed to huddle against the darkness. Poirot, retiring to his room, locked the door, the key from the portrait heavy in his pocket. He knew the ledger and the initials CB were threads in a tightening web. The killer had struck twice, each death a step to conceal the fortune's secret. Poirot's little gray cells worked tirelessly, sensing the truth was near. But the shadow of the portrait loomed larger, and he feared the next act would be the deadliest yet. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The morning after Dr. Malcolm Trent's murder, Belgrave House seemed to shrink under the weight of its own secrets. The grand rooms, once vibrant with the glow of wealth, now felt stifling, as if the very air conspired to smother the truth. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, his small, precise figure a beacon of calm amid the gathering storm. The brass key from the portrait tucked safely in his waistcoat, and the ledger from Sir Reginald's study weighed heavily on his mind. 2 deaths, Victor Moreau and Dr. Trent, had stained the house, and Poirot knew the killer was among the remaining guests, their motives tangled like threads in a skein. Captain Hastings, nursing a cup of tea by the fire, broke the silence. "It's getting worse, Poirot. 2 murders, and we're no closer to catching the culprit. That ledger, those payments to CB, do you think Clara's behind it all?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching. "Patience, mon ami. The truth is like a mosaic. We have the pieces, but the pattern is not yet clear. The initials CB are significant, but they may not point to Mademoiselle Beaumont alone." The guests were summoned to the drawing room, their faces etched with fatigue and fear. Lady Eleanor sat erect, her hands clasped tightly, her mourning black a stark contrast to her pale complexion. Clara Beaumont, her beauty dimmed by sleeplessness, twisted a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Julian Ashby slouched in an armchair, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers, his defiance barely masking his unease. Beatrice Lyle, ever the quiet observer, sat with her embroidery, though her needle remained still, her gaze alert. Poirot paced before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice measured but commanding. "Mes amis, we stand at a crossroads. 2 men are dead. Victor Moreau, poisoned, and Dr. Malcolm Trent, stabbed. Both deaths are linked to the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashby, a canvas that is more than art. It is a key to a hidden fortune, a secret someone in this room will kill to protect." A murmur rippled through the group. Julian snorted, exhaling smoke. "Fortune? More fairy tales. If there was money, I'd have found it by now." Poirot ignored him, continuing. "The portrait was slashed to conceal a clue, a brass key hidden in its frame. This key opened a drawer in Sir Reginald's study, revealing a ledger of payments to C.B. These payments, made days before Sir Reginald's death, suggest a secret transaction. But what? And who is C.B.? Clara's head snapped up, her voice trembling. "I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, Reggie supported my theater work. Those payments were for me, but they were no secret. I had nothing to do with these murders." Lady Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to Beatrice Lyle, his tone gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle Lyle, you have been most observant. You heard footsteps in the gallery before the portrait was slashed. You saw Dr. Trent near the study. Is there more you have seen? Perhaps something you hesitated to share?" Beatrice's fingers tightened on her embroidery hoop. She glanced at Julian, then spoke softly. "Last night, after Dr. Trent's body was found, I saw someone else. It was Julian in the guest wing near Moreau's room. He was carrying something, a small bundle wrapped in cloth." Julian leapt to his feet, his cigarette falling to the rug. "That's a lie. I was in my room all night, drowning my sorrows. Ask the footman." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Monsieur Ashby, your debts are well known. A fortune hidden by your stepfather would be a great temptation, non? Did you believe the portrait held the answer to your troubles?" Julian's face reddened, but he sank back into his chair, muttering. Poirot turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, you spoke of a secret engagement to Sir Reginald. Did anyone else know of this?" Clara hesitated, her eyes flickering to Lady Eleanor. "Only Victor. I told him in confidence, months ago. He teased me about it. Said Reggie's portrait would be his greatest work because it held a piece of his heart." Poirot's mind raced, the mosaic taking shape. He addressed Lady Eleanor. "Madame, you have been silent, yet you knew of Sir Reginald's plans, his secrets. Did you suspect the portrait's true purpose?" Lady Eleanor's composure wavered, her fingers twisting her brooch. "I knew Reggie was secretive. He spoke of safeguarding his legacy, but I thought it was his collection, paintings, sculptures. I never imagined a fortune." Poirot nodded, though his eyes betrayed his skepticism. He produced the half-burned letter from Moreau's room, holding it aloft. "This letter, found in Monsieur Moreau's fireplace, warns him to not reveal the truth. The handwriting is elegant, precise. It suggests someone feared his knowledge of the portrait's secret." A gasp escaped Clara, and Julian's scowl deepened. Beatrice's eyes widened, but she remained silent. Lady Eleanor's face was a mask, though her hands trembled slightly. Poirot continued, his voice rising. Dr. Trent, too, knew something. The prescription in his hand, marked C.B., suggests he uncovered a connection, perhaps to the ledger, perhaps to the fortune. His death was no random act. It was to silence him. Hastings, unable to contain himself, blurted, "But who, Poirot? Who's doing this?" Poirot's gaze swept the room. "The killer is here, among us. They are clever, but not clever enough to escape Hercule Poirot. I ask you all to reflect. Any detail, however small, may prevent another tragedy." The guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy with dread. Poirot lingered, his mind sifting through the clues. The key, the ledger, the letter, the initials. He spoke softly to Hastings. "The fortune is real, mon ami, and it is close. The killer believes they can bury the truth with blood, but they underestimate the little gray cells. As evening approached, Poirot requested a private word with Perkins, the butler, who confirmed a rumor. "Sir, Reginald had a hidden safe, its location known only to him." "Some say it's in the cellar, sir," Perkins whispered, "but no one's found it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Perkins. You have been most helpful." Alone in his room, Poirot examined the key again, its crest catching the lamplight. The cellar, the ledger, the portrait, all pointed to a truth buried deep. But the killer was watching, and Poirot knew the next move would be his, or theirs. The web was tightening, and the unraveling of Belgrave House's secrets was at hand. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. The drawing room of Belgrave House was steeped in a hush that seemed to amplify every creak of the floorboards and crackle of the fire. The late afternoon light, filtered through heavy clouds, cast a pall over the gathered guests, their faces taut with the strain of 2 murders and the specter of a third. Hercule Poirot stood before them, his small figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. His hands were clasped behind his back, his green eyes sharp as they swept over Lady Eleanor Ashby, Clara Beaumont, Julian Ashby, and Beatrice Lyle. The brass key from the portrait and the ledger from Sir Reginald's study were safely tucked away, but their secrets weighed heavily on Poirot's mind. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his expression a mix of anticipation and unease. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate. "We have come to the heart of this dark affair. Victor Moreau and Dr. Malcolm Trent lie dead, their lives extinguished to protect a secret hidden within Sir Reginald Ashby's portrait. That secret is a fortune, a cache of wealth concealed with great care. The portrait was its guardian, the key its gatekeeper, and the ledger its map. But someone in this room has killed to keep it buried." Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Clara's breath caught, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Julian stubbed out his cigarette, his eyes narrowing. Beatrice, her embroidery abandoned, watched Poirot with a quiet intensity. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping rhythmically. "Let us reconstruct. The portrait, painted by Monsieur Moreau, was slashed to destroy a clue, the brass key hidden in its frame. This key unlocked a drawer in Sir Reginald's study, revealing a ledger with payments to C.B. These payments, substantial and recent, suggest a secret transaction. But who is C.B.? Mademoiselle Beaumont. You admitted to receiving funds from Sir Reginald for your theatre work, yet I wonder if there is more." Clara's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot. Reggie loved me, supported me. I knew nothing of a fortune." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "Patience, mademoiselle. Let us consider another clue. The half-burned letter in Monsieur Moreau's fireplace, warning him to not reveal the truth. The handwriting is elegant, precise, feminine. It points to a mind both calculating and desperate." He turned to Beatrice Lyle, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Lyle, you have seen much. You heard footsteps in the gallery, saw Dr. Trent near the study, and observed Monsieur Julian in the guest wing after the second murder. But there is more. Yes, you have held something back." Beatrice's hands trembled, but she met his eyes. I saw Lady Eleanor in the gallery too, before the portrait was slashed. She was alone, staring at it. I thought she was grieving, but now— Lady Eleanor's face paled, her voice sharp. "That's absurd. I was in my room preparing for bed. Beatrice, you're mistaken." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Non, madame. I believe Mademoiselle Lyle speaks the truth. Let us examine the facts. The portrait was commissioned by you, madame, on Mademoiselle Beaumont's recommendation. You knew of Sir Reginald's secret fortune. Jewels, perhaps, hidden in a safe. You spread rumors of a curse to distract from the portrait's true purpose. When Monsieur Moreau, perhaps through his work, discovered the key's significance, you acted. The poison was swift, staged as suicide." Lady Eleanor rose, her voice icy. "You have no proof, Monsieur Poirot. This is slander." Poirot produced the burned letter, holding it delicately. "This, madame, is in your hand. I compared it to your invitation to me. The script is identical. You warned Moreau to stay silent, but he would not. Dr. Trent, too, stumbled upon the truth, perhaps through the ledger, perhaps through overhearing you. The prescription marked CB in his hand was a clue, but not to Clara Beaumont. CB stands for Celia Blackwood, your maiden name, madame, used in Sir Reginald's private transactions to conceal the fortune's transfer to you." A collective gasp filled the room. Julian leapt up, his face contorted. "Mother, is this true? Did you kill them?" Lady Eleanor's composure shattered, her hands trembling violently. I had to protect us, Julian. Your father's fortune was ours by right, but you'd squander it on gambling. Clara would claim it through her engagement. I hid it in the cellar safe, and the portrait was the clue. Moreau guessed, and Trent overheard me speaking to Perkins. I couldn't let them ruin everything. Clara sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Beatrice's eyes were wide with shock, while Julian sank back, stunned. Hastings whispered, "Good Lord, Poirot, you've done it." Poirot's voice softened, though his resolve was iron. "Madame, you slashed the portrait to destroy the key's hiding place. You poisoned Moreau and stabbed Trent, believing their silence would secure your secret. But murder, it leaves traces. The paint on the windowsill, the letter, the ledger, the little gray cells. They do not forgive such oversights." Lady Eleanor collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face. "I only wanted to protect our legacy," she whispered. "Reggie would have understood." Poirot shook his head. "Non, madame. Murder is never justified. Inspector Grayson, I trust you will take charge." Grayson, who had arrived quietly during the confrontation, nodded grimly. "We'll need a full statement, Lady Eleanor. Come with me." As she was led away, the room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling like dust. Poirot turned to the others. "The truth is painful, but it is free. Mademoiselle Beaumont, Monsieur Ashby, Mademoiselle Lyle. Go forward with honesty, lest such secrets destroy you." The guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy with the burden of what they had witnessed. Poirot remained, his gaze fixed on the fire, the brass key now a cold weight in his pocket. The portrait's shadow had lifted, but its cost was steep, and the little gray cells rested only briefly, for the world was never short of mysteries. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The storm that had threatened Belgrave House all weekend broke at last, rain lashing the windows, as if to wash away the sins of the past days. The drawing room, once a stage for secrets and accusations, now held only the echo of Lady Eleanor Ashby's confession. Hercule Poirot stood by the hearth, his small figure silhouetted against the flickering firelight, his hands clasped behind his back. The brass key, the ledger, and the burned letter had served their purpose, unraveling a tale of greed and murder. Yet the resolution brought no triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of truth restored. Captain Hastings, seated in an armchair, nursed a brandy, his face etched with the weariness of one who had witnessed too much. "By Jove, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "you've done it again. Lady Eleanor, of all people, I'd never have guessed she had it in her." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Mon ami, the heart of a murderer is not always apparent. Lady Eleanor was driven by fear of losing her status, her son's future, her control. Such fears can turn even the most refined into monsters. The police, under Inspector Grayson's direction, had acted swiftly. Lady Eleanor was taken to the local station, her composure shattered, her confession a torrent of regret and defiance. The cellar safe, located behind a false panel in the wine vault, had been opened with the brass key. Inside, a trove of rare jewels, emeralds, sapphires, and a single flawless diamond glittered in their velvet cases, a fortune hidden by Sir Reginald to secure his family's future. The ledger's entries, Poirot explained to Grayson, detailed payments to a discreet jeweler under Lady Eleanor's maiden name, Celia Blackwood, to amass the collection without arousing suspicion. As the rain drummed on, the remaining guests gathered their belongings, eager to flee the house's oppressive air. Clara Beaumont, her eyes swollen from tears, approached Poirot in the hall. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I can't thank you enough. You cleared my name, showed I had no part in this horror. But I feel such guilt. If I hadn't suggested Victor—" Poirot raised a hand, his expression kind but firm. "Mademoiselle, guilt is a heavy burden, but it does not belong to you. Your love for Sir Reginald was genuine, and you could not foresee the consequences. Go to London, resume your art. It is what he would have wished." Clara nodded, a flicker of resolve in her eyes, and left to pack her valise. Julian Ashby, sobered by the revelation of his mother's crimes, lingered in the library, staring at the empty space where the portrait had hung. Poirot found him there, his face a mask of conflict. "Monsieur Ashby," Poirot said gently, "your mother sought to protect you, but her path was wrong. You have a chance now to rebuild, to honor your father's true legacy." Julian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I've been a fool, Poirot. The gambling, the anger. I'll try to do better, for father's sake." Beatrice Lyle, ever the quiet presence, was preparing to depart as well, her role as Lady Eleanor's companion now obsolete. She paused to speak with Poirot, her plain face softened by gratitude. "Your eyes see what others miss, Monsieur Poirot. I only wish I'd spoken sooner about what I saw." "You spoke when it mattered, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "Your observations were invaluable. The truth owes you a debt." As the guests departed, the house seemed to exhale, its grandeur restored, but its heart bruised. Inspector Grayson, preparing to leave, tipped his hat to Poirot. "You've a knack for this, sir. I'd have called it suicide and moved on. You've saved us from a grave mistake." Poirot bowed slightly. "The little gray cells, Inspector. They demand precision. Justice is not served by haste." With the police gone, Poirot and Hastings stood on the gravel drive, awaiting their taxi. The rain had eased to a drizzle, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth. Hastings, pulling his coat tighter, glanced at Poirot. That curse nonsense. Pure coincidence, eh? Just a cover for Lady Eleanor's schemes? Poirot's eyes twinkled enigmatically. Coincidence, Hastings, is often the shadow cast by truth. The curse was a fiction, yes, but it served to obscure the real danger, the greed within these walls. We have peeled back the shadow, and the truth stands revealed. The taxi arrived, its headlights cutting through the dusk. As they climbed in, Poirot cast a final glance at Belgrave House, its windows dark, its secrets laid bare. "Onward, mon ami," he said, settling into the seat. "The world is full of puzzles, and Hercule Poirot is never idle." Hastings chuckled. "Never a dull moment with you, old chap. What's next?" Poirot's smile was serene. "The next mystery, Hastings. Always the next mystery." As the taxi rolled away, the silhouette of Belgrave House faded into the mist, a monument to a tragedy resolved but never forgotten. The fatal portrait had claimed its victims, but Poirot's relentless pursuit of truth had ensured that justice at least prevailed.